Taiwanese election. Can we translate it into a message which indicates that the majority of the Taiwanese voters, they accept the so-called 1992 consensus?
Yeah. Well, I think it's always problematic to try to read a clear message from an election when, at least in my estimation, the candidate who won did not say that was the question on the ballot. The question on the ballot was, did he deserve another 4 years or not? It was not, do you support my interpretation of the 92 consensus or not? So it was not a referendum question. It was choosing a candidate to stay in the office of the president. I also would be extremely humble about trying to tell 23 million people in Taiwan what they think they voted for. It's not my country. It was not my election. It's not my place to tell them what they do or don't believe about the 1992 consensus. From my personal point of view, the 1992 consensus is complete fiction. So is One China. There are many fictions that we use in talking about policy towards China. And people pretend as though these are reality. And they say that they are a status quo. But the status quo is the third fiction. There is no such thing in life as a status quo. Everything is changing, and hopefully are progressing. And it should be no one's policy to stand still. So, at least in my opinion, the outcome of the election tells me that, unfortunate for the DPP, their candidate did not make a successful campaign for change. Fortunate for the KMT, they were able to hold on to another 4 years in power. But there was a clear change in terms of level of support from 2008 to 2012. And I think that President Ma in his second term will face a lot of challenges. The political landscape is slightly more balanced, more competitive. And there are many other reasons why I think the coming 4 years will be quite difficult. So I don't think that there was a clear message about the 1992 consensus. And I don't think that it necessarily resolves any great topics of debate in one ballot.
In your point of view, after the election, is Taiwan's security getting stronger or getting weaker?
Well, I think the only way you can reasonably assess what Taiwan's security environment is first, based on what you can see and measure, has a single missile turned away, has a single fighter jet on the mainland been disassembled or moved to some other place, has the mainland undeclared war on Taiwan. And at least in my humble estimation, the vote did not change the very precarious reality that Taiwan lives in. People of Taiwan live in a high degree of comfort, but they do not have the comfort of internationally recognized sovereignty. They do not have the comfort of knowing that their neighbor has peaceful intentions. And so while I think that the election outcome allowed a lot of people in the foreign policy establishments around the world to breathe a sigh of relief, it should not be mistaken for peace.
And the other question is, do you worry that maybe in the future, sometimes Taiwan could be sacrificed by the U.S. government in order to get some deal done with the Chinese government? Could that happen?
Well, I think in reality those are two separate propositions. Could the United States sacrifice Taiwan at some point? I would have to answer with there are elites in our country who have tried for 40 years to sacrifice Taiwan. We are fortunate that they have not been thus far successful. But really, from the deals made in the Kissinger-Nixon era to today, the whole notion of speaking about a one China policy, one China can only mean one thing, is that our elites imagine some kind of a unification in which Taiwan is a part of China. And so that has been their dream, it seems. And they have spoken of the dream as if it's reality. And so if they, over all this time, have been willing to sacrifice Taiwan. I have to believe that that challenge still exists. The second part of it, will they get something for it? I believe the answer is no. China has learned very well for the last 40 years that they don't have to pay anything, that Americans, for the most part, are all too willing to concede without them having to do anything or having to change their behavior. I think this is one area where Americans need to be much more critical of our government and be more active in pressing them to change their behavior. We should treat China as a normal country. When we face a significant threat, say from developments in Iran, and China notably blocks any even small effort to constrain Iran at the United Nations, we should not be having a giant party in Washington to welcome the vice president, soon-to-be president of China. We should have a more serious conversation about the different foreign policy challenges we struggle with.
Thank you. I don't have further questions. Is there anything you'd like to add which I didn't ask?
Only the part that speaks of my complete brilliance and that everyone should contribute money to the political campaigns that I support. I assume that there are a lot of pieces of news at the moment where there's an anticipation of an inauguration that is still very far away. When you look at Taiwan politics, one of the things that is very unusual in this cycle is you had an election in January and an inauguration in May. There are almost no modern democracies that have this long of a transition. There are still many other elements of Taiwan's democratic progress that, in my view, remain unfinished. Every democracy is a work in progress. My hope is that people in Taiwan will not look at elections as an end of a particular contest, but as a milestone in a longer path toward, as we say in the United States, a more perfect union, but for Taiwan, a more perfect democratic future. I hope that people in Taiwan will look very, very seriously at the institutions that need to be strengthened in Taiwan's democracy, and that young people will have an added appreciation for what a blessing it is to live in a free society, and that they will also have a full appreciation for the lack of that freedom across the Taiwan Strait, and that they should be very, very cautious about everything that is necessary to protect that freedom.
Thank you, Dr. Lee.
Thank you.
I can take a picture.
Sure. Sitting, standing, in a yoga pose.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good to meet you, Daniel.
Yeah. Steve, how about, do you have some question?
Oh, I don't know if I can answer.
Dr. Yates, as you know, money talk with a very, very strong influence through the KMT's money or property or assets. They control media, they control everything, and fighting with the other DPP Chairman Chai, he only can get a donation from those very poor, low-income people. How do you expect that this re-election is that fair for the Taiwanese people? And what is your suggestion if you are the DPP side? What can you do?
Well, I appreciate the question. It's very, very difficult for me to pretend I am a DPP voter in Taiwan because I am not one. But I have some strong sympathy with the challenge. I am currently working with a campaign in the United States that could say many of the same things you just did about an opponent with almost unlimited funds, with media whose coverage is not terribly balanced or fair, and having to think of a way, how do you win under those circumstances? Personally, I think fairness is a myth. Life isn't fair. Things are never going to be balanced and equal. But you face challenges, and the question is, what will it take to overcome them? And I think when it comes to an establishment, an elite, that feels like they can buy victory, take away your freedom to choose, you have to then marshal larger numbers of people. Number one, they have to believe that there is a crisis. One of the issues in this last election is that the majority of voters in Taiwan didn't believe that they were facing any crisis. If they did, they would have been concerned and would have voted for change. Many did vote for change. Tsai Ing-wen received a lot of votes. It just wasn't enough to win. And it was far more balanced than 2008 election was. It was a very lopsided victory then. So she made a great deal of progress in guiding the Democratic Progressive Party from a low point in 2008 to an inadequate but still much more competitive showing in 2012. The way ahead for the DPP, would seem to me, is to continue to build that base larger and larger. But clearly, much more work needs to be done to figure out how to connect with more people in Taiwan. How do you get the newer voters to feel as passionately about what's at stake in these elections as you do? And I think that is a significant challenge, and the answers are not yet clear. There is a solid older generation of people in Taiwan who know what it was like to live under martial law, who know what the democratic transition process was, who are voting at the same time as people who were born after martial law was lifted, and whose entire reality is in a much more free and open and modern and prosperous society. They don't have the clear sense of what it feels like and what it means for freedom not to exist. But people who lived through that period do, much more strongly. And so coming up with a new message